Right, good afternoon. We'll call to order the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals regular meeting for December 18th, 2014. Before we get started, got a couple of announcements. First, congratulations are in order to Miss Julie King, who's on our board, who's absent today, on the birth of their son, Colin James King. I'm sure they're curled up on the couch, tuned to Channel 3 as we speak. Congratulations to them. And also I'd like to introduce Miss Susan Reinhardt, who is helping us out while Miss Brenda is out with some surgery. So I hope Brenda's doing well and look forward to return, and welcome to Miss Reinhardt there. Now we'll move on to new business. First application is number Z14066 by Mr. Adam Holstead, requesting a 10-foot variance from the minimum required 30-foot front setback for principal structures. This is for property located in an RS8 zone at the northwest corner of Manny Avenue and Jackson Street at 603 North Manny Avenue. The variance request pertains to the front building setback along Manny Avenue. Matthew, if you'd go over that one for us.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Vice Chairman Young, and good afternoon, Vice Chairman Young and members of the board. Our first item today, as you mentioned, is a front setback variance request for property located at the northwest corner of North Manny Avenue and Jackson Street. This property was the location of a quadruplex that burned down about 1 to 2 years ago. And the applicant, Mr. Holstead, purchased the property and has since divided it into 2 lots. You'll see on the aerial photo in front of you how that has been divided into 2 lots. The lots are depicted here. The lot in question, which this variance pertains to, is the property with the word site on it, right at the corner. The property is located in an RS8 zoning district, and in the RS8 zoning district there is a 30-foot front setback, and of course for a corner lot there are 2 front setbacks and 2 side setbacks. Mr. Holstead, who is the owner and would be the contractor on the property, is requesting the variances on behalf of his purchaser, who is also in the audience today as well. The property, as I mentioned, is zoned RS8 with 30-foot front setbacks. The applicant would like to reduce the front setback along Manny to 20, is requesting a 10-foot variance. All other setbacks would remain as prescribed by the zoning ordinance. The applicant would like for the proposed house to face North Manny Avenue. With this in mind, the subject lot is approximately 118 feet wide by 76 feet deep. And the front setback requirement in the RS8 zone is 30 feet, and the side setback requirement in the RS8 district on this particular lot would be 5 feet along the west property line and 10 feet along the north property line. The current setbacks would allow for a house with a depth of approximately 41 feet to be constructed. The house plan, excluding porches, is 46 feet wide and 32 feet deep. However, taking into account both the front porch and the back porch, the depth of the house is 42 feet, as both the front and back porches are 5 feet deep. So the building envelope is almost deep enough to accommodate the proposed house plans for this lot. However, with the porches, it is actually a little bit too shallow to accommodate the house plan. But for that reason, but also for the reason that the applicant would like to build a house that is harmonious with the existing neighborhood and in keeping with the existing developed lots along North Manny Avenue, he is requesting that 10-foot front setback, as some of the houses along North Manny Avenue do not meet the 30-foot front setback requirement because they were constructed prior to our current zoning ordinance going into effect. Many constructed decades before the current zoning ordinance went into effect. Staff reviewed the houses that are the 2 houses to the north and the 2 houses to the south, and found that of the 2 houses to the north, one was approximately 30 feet off the front property line, and one was about 25 feet off the front property line. Of the houses to the south, the one directly across Jackson was about 25 feet off the front property line, and the one to the south of that one on the corner was pushed a little bit further back. The quadruplex that was on the property was actually approximately 23 feet off of the property line along North Manny Avenue. So it was actually very close in proximity to North Manny Avenue in comparison with the applicant's request. So it was about 23 feet off the front property line. The applicant is requesting for his house to be about 20 feet off the front property line. One thing to keep in mind is the entire main plane, front wall, the main plane of the home would not be at 20 feet off that property line, because the porch would be the only part of the house that would be at 20 feet, and the porch is 5 feet in depth. So the front wall of the home would actually be 25 feet off of the front property line. And all of those distances on the adjacent lots are approximate based on our GIS and based on approximate measurements that I've taken out in the field. So those aren't survey accurate, they're just my best estimate on the distances for the adjacent lots. Staff believes that the subject lot is a good candidate for a front setback variance. The request is consistent with the recommendations of the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan, which our department and the BZA and the Planning Commission use as a tool to help guide development in the North Manny Avenue area. The plan identifies the subject property as being located in the North Manny Garden District. And with regards to the North Manny Garden District, the plan recommends as a key design standard reduced front setbacks to better relate homes to the street. It recommends a minimum front setback of 10 feet and a maximum front setback of 20 feet. So as you can tell, his request is consistent with the recommendations of the plan that was adopted by the Planning Commission about 7 or 8 years ago. The plan noted that in many instances, the suburban zoning requirements that are currently in place are not conducive to redevelopment of the older, more urbanized areas of the city. The plan also recommended that proper building orientation be considered, and staff believes that given the importance of the Manny Avenue corridor from Southeast Broad Street to Oakland's Mansion, the front facade of any house constructed on this lot should be oriented to face North Manny Avenue. With this in mind, the lot's lack of depth from front to back presents some difficulties when attempting to situate a house on this lot. As a side note, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the city is contemplating improvements to North Manny Avenue. I've consulted with the city engineer, and although plans have not been finalized, there's only a preliminary set of plans right now that are subject to some additional changes. No additional right-of-way will be needed adjacent to the subject property, so that front property line will remain in its current place along North Manny Avenue. Here is the applicant's plot plan, and as you can see along North Manny Avenue, the front porch would be at 20 feet off of the front property line, but the main plane of the home would be at 25 feet off of the front property line. Being able to push the house closer to North Manny Avenue would also allow the applicant to have a little bit more substantial backyard as well. Here is the house elevation, the elevations that the applicant has submitted along with his plans. This is the exterior of the house that he would like to build on the subject property. Finally, there is a letter included in the agenda materials from Mr. Doug Young, who owns the property directly to the north, and Mr. Young is in support of the variance. And also, the letter indicates that he is also representing his business partner, Mr. Ben Hall McFarland, who owns the property across Jackson Street to the south, also in support of the application. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Holstead is in attendance, as is Mr. Corey Williams, his purchaser, if you have any questions for him.
Thank you, Matthew. Any question for Matthew at this point? If not, we'll go ahead and conduct the public hearing. Anyone present that wishes to speak for or against the application, if you'd come forward and state your name and address and any comments that you might have.
My name is Ray Cole. I live just 619 North Manny on the other just one block, next door to McFarland and Mr. Green's house. So we're on just to the north. Our house was just one at the top of the photograph. And, of course, our concern is that our house predated the zoning by 100 years. And the one next to us was built right up there, actually predates ours, and there's one around across next door is 1870s, and the other one is 1820s. So there is, that is the look of Manny Avenue. Obviously, what they're contemplating is sort of a double wide with a porch on it. So there's nothing we can do about that. We witnessed the sort of double wide looking place that's at the corner of Manny and Evergreen. So our concern is just that as long as there's going to be something that is obviously not going to be architecturally in tune with any other structure on the street, that it not be set out where anybody driving by and taking pictures, which happens all the time in our neighborhood, that would be the first thing they'll see is this thing sitting out ahead of other properties. If he's dumb enough to buy a piece of property that doesn't fit the house he's going to build, that's his fault. I build things. We've redone 5 houses on the street and haven't had to come to you to ask for anything like this. So my point is, we've all been there, in our case, since 1866. We got along just fine with the rules as they are, even back when there aren't any rules. And if he wants to build something like that, he should go someplace where the plan fits the lot. That's not our fault. And it shouldn't affect the way our street looks just because they bought a lot or want to build a house on a lot that doesn't fit the plan. What's that to us? Why should we have to put up with that? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for hearing our petition. I'm Adam Holstead. When I purchased this lot and the size that it was before, first of all, my reasoning for the subdivision of the lot was just due to my age group and people that I know, and I don't tend to know people that can afford the larger, big houses, and so my original plan was to build 2 smaller homes fitting the area as best as possible. What I've chosen to do is the house, if you looked at the front elevation, just addressing the last comments, it has a lot of components that are more modern, but it follows the theme of the older days with exposed overhangs and rafters. It's got a craftsman style feel to it. We are doing some different things as far as putting the house on a concrete slab, which is kind of, that's more of a modern day thing, and modern vinyl windows. However, we think that the house fits not only the area, but we also think it would fit in the age bracket and the idea of, kind of maybe modernizing some more different businesses in downtown and the people that would afford to be able to live in that area. I think that addresses maybe the past comments. We don't intend in any way to do anything or put anything on the lot that doesn't flow with the area. We just didn't see a need to put a house similar to the ones built in the past, except for just a few key features. I personally measure, after Mr. Blomley was good enough to give us some direction, I also measured the approximate measurements that he gave for the houses close to it are similar. We don't need any kind of a variance, as he said, on the side setback of Jackson. That works fine. The main reason for this was not that the house would not fit on this lot, because that would have been adaptable. But the main thing was following I'm used to building new homes and newer developments, and you must kind of look right and left to line the properties up. My dad gave me that lesson. Don't build one out too far or don't set one too back. He'd say, look both ways. And looking both ways, it's about a 3 or 4 foot difference from the front plane, the front elevations of the houses next to it. I think that's all I got.
Thanks, sir. Any questions for the for the applicant. I didn't check with him first. Yes, sure.
My name is Corey Williams. I'm going to be the person purchasing the house. And I went to a great extent for a considerable amount of time trying to plan this house so that it would look like downtown. It won't have like vinyl siding. The siding you see on there is going to be hardy board siding. The windows, we specifically picked a style that's traditional to the bungalow era, the Craftsman era. I'm obsessed with Frank Lloyd Wright and that era of the house. So I want it to look outside aesthetically like that. So it has the what they call the elephant foot columns that are I guess I don't know what you call them in technical terms, but you know they slant. The siding will be hardy board. It'll have the hardy board style shakes at the top pitches of it. The house will be along that like 20s, 30s, 40s time frame of paint colors. So it won't stick out like a sore thumb in the area. If you drive down Manny or College or Spring, there are tons of bungalows from that era, and that's the whole feel of the house. The 3/1 windows. So we're going to a little extra expense of putting hardy board and the 3/1 windows and the expensive Craftsman's door just to make it look and feel like it has been there for a long time. We don't want it to look like it was just a trailer pulled in there and parked there. So I just wanted to say that we made a lot of effort just to make it look like it fits in the area. So
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to this application? If not, we'll close the public hearing. Okay. Okay.
Their slab house is going to be this much lower to the first floor than any house up and down the block. So it is in no way going to fit in with the neighborhood. Every other house there is set this high up off the ground. That's what people did back then. Ours is on stones. So the notion that somehow or another his slab house sitting on the ground is going to fit in with the architecture of the neighborhood just shows how very little consideration they've given to or idea of fitting into the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, at this time we'll close the public hearing and open the floor for any further discussion or motion.
And Vice Chairman Young, I neglected to show you the photographs of the property earlier. Would it be okay if
Sure.
Oh, and also I zoomed in a little bit more to the elevation of the home. And this is the subject property as viewed from North Manny Avenue. That the metal-roofed accessory structure was accessory to the old quadruplex that used to be on the subject property. This is a profile view of the adjacent properties to the north. And looking at the adjacent properties across Jackson Street. This is looking down Jackson Street. And looking east across North Manny Avenue. And looking southeast across North Manny Avenue.
Thank you.
Mr. Blomley, as being this board, the Board of Zoning Appeals, I mean, we don't really get into the design or look of a particular structure. That would be, and I'll ask this question also, is this area come before the historic zoning or no?
It does not. Our historic zoning district does not extend this far north on North Manny Avenue.
Right.
I know there have been discussions in times past about possibly expanding the historic zoning district, but nothing has ever moved forward with regards to that. And as far as the any kind of architecture or exterior materials with regard to the building, I believe that would certainly be in the purview of the board if it was if in order to if the board felt that such a condition would help mitigate any impact of the variance, that would be within your purview to condition approval on certain materials or architectural features. I believe I would be correct in stating that, Mr. Ives. Is that?
I'm not sure that I would agree with that. We're looking at setbacks here, which is a normal question for the BZA, particularly in these neighborhoods where the zoning setback is a fair amount different than the actual setbacks of the homes that are there. You know, when you look at the determinations that this board is to make, I don't believe that this board has artistic, we haven't really faced that one before, I don't think, but that might be a fair question of whether preserving the character of the neighborhood would extend to the design of the house that is going to go onto a residential lot. Certainly if the variance was to allow this to be a commercial activity of some kind, then the character of the neighborhood might come into play. I don't know that we've ever had to face this question before. I don't think we have since I've been here. But I think that from what I've been able to tell, the home that's proposed meets the requirements of the city, and there is no requirement that I'm aware of that the structure has to particularly fit in with design. And in fact, even in the historic district, while one of the rules is that you don't want to build something new and make it look like something it's not. Now, there is some more guidance that may be available, but the Historic Zoning Commission would not want someone to try to replicate a house that was built 100 years ago. There are certainly designs that would fit in better or worse within the Main Street area, but to try to recreate something that it's not would not generally be favored.
I guess my feeling in 100 years of construction in this area or more, as the gentleman said, there's going to be some different styles through the years. It gets hard to decide what's going to work and what's not. I don't want to ignore any of the neighbors' feelings, but I thought it's consistent with some of the other development we've seen in the area from what I can see from the drawings there. So. My thoughts there. Any other?
I would just want to confirm what you said earlier, Matthew, that, as you mentioned on a couple of different occasions with respects to the distance difference and the setback that's being requested, and then, whether or not they're actually in line with some of the adjacent properties. And I think I heard you say, maybe, well, by the time you take the porch out, that you may be anywhere from 3 to 5 feet difference than some of the adjacent properties, and that what was adopted for this area, what did you say, 7 years ago by the...
It was about 2005, 2006,
yeah.
Some 8 or 9 years ago.
So the typical setback would be somewhere in the area of 20 feet, which is exactly what they're asking for. Did I hear you say that correctly?
That's correct. The plan, the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan, it's not ordinance, so it's not, but it is a comprehensive plan that is to provide guidance. And the recommendation of the plan was a minimum front setback in this area of 10 feet and a maximum front setback of 20 feet.
It just looks like a pretty good plan to me. It's not too modern looking, and it seems like it would fit in the area.
I don't know that I guess I agree with Mr. Ives. I'm not sure that we're privy here to go through a design review, nor do I feel like that I am intelligent or have enough history or information that I'm studied up on that I can make that determination what would be right or wrong. What I do feel like is that that's not something that this board has taken into consideration in the past, and we have seen these variances in this area come before us, and it sounds like that this meets some of the plan design in reference to the setback request. So I'm going to make a motion that we approve.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none. That application's been approved. We'll move now to the next application, application Z14067 by Mr. Matt Taylor of SEC Inc. and Mr. Roy Williams of EH Architects for Dunkin' Donuts. They're requesting a variance from the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which requires 10 queue spaces for any drive-up window or drive-through lane for property located in a heavy industrial zone at 833 Memorial Boulevard. The applicants are requesting a variance of 3 queue spaces in order to provide 7 queue spaces on site instead of the 10 spaces required by the zoning ordinance. Matthew, if you'll review that one for us.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. The subject property is an existing multi-tenant retail center along the west side of Memorial Boulevard, just south of Medical Center Parkway. It's directly across the street from the Nissan dealership. There are currently a variety of retail, office, and restaurant tenants in the building. The applicants who represent the local franchisee of Dunkin' Donuts would like to build out the end tenant space for a new Dunkin' Donuts in this shopping center. And because of the existing limitations on the site, they are not able to fit in the required 10 queue spaces. In our zoning ordinance for restaurants, and this would be considered a specialty restaurant, there is a minimum 10 queue space requirement. And those 10 queue spaces are from the pickup window back. So, and as we know, as we've seen at many different types of restaurant establishments, in many instances, those 10 queue spaces are definitely warranted. However, in this instance, the applicant contends that the 10 queue spaces for this type of operation are not warranted because it's a different type of restaurant operation. One of the things that he points out, and you'll see I included an email from Mr. Williams in the agenda materials, is information that he has provided to contrast this type of drive-through operation with that of, say, a McDonald's, for example. Mr. Williams' email indicates that the drive-through traffic for an average Dunkin' Donuts would be approximately half that of an average McDonald's, and the service time, or the average service time from when someone pulls up and orders to the time they pick up their food is 40 seconds less than that of McDonald's on average. Now, this is, there was no specific data provided other than the information provided by the applicant. There was no study that was provided, but this is anecdotal information provided by the applicant. So his contention is that there are fewer customers visiting his operation than a McDonald's, and the amount of time that it takes to service those customers is less, meaning that the drive-through or the queue spaces in the drive-through do not require as great a capacity as a McDonald's, for example. He also indicates that several other Dunkin' Donuts in their franchise ownership group operate with fewer than 10 queue spaces. including their highest volume store in Hickson, Tennessee, which has a total 7-vehicle queue, just like what they're asking for. They're asking for a 3-space variance so that they can provide 7 queue spaces instead of 10 queue spaces. And you'll see on the screen in front of you the aerial photo of the subject property. And I'll show you the site plan. And you'll see on sheet 3 of 3 the 7 queue spaces wrapping around the building. They could potentially add 1 or 2 more queue spaces if the pickup window was closer to the front of the building, and they explored that option. But for operational efficiency, they have located the pickup window where they can provide the greatest amount of efficiency inside the building in preparing and processing the food. We have reviewed this application with our traffic engineer, and he notes that the request will have minimal impact on the public right-of-way because the drive-through line is remote from the public right-of-way. And you'll see by looking at the aerial photo where the end of the queue line would be back here to the rear of the building. And that queue line would intersect with a private drive that services the Carpenter Village subdivision. So while he indicates that it will have minimal impact on the public streets, he does note that in the event that Dunkin' Donuts does have greater than 7 vehicles in the queue at this location, the additional vehicles will queue in the shared private drive and potentially block this drive. So that is a possibility, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. But because of its remoteness from the public right-of-way, I believe our traffic engineer is not opposed to the variance request. Also, with the way that this site has been developed, you'll notice that there is the parking lot does not circulate around the north side of the building. So there's no opportunity, because of the way the site was originally developed, for the queue line to continue along the north, or continue along the back of the building to the north side of the building. So they're limited they're fundamentally limited because of the original design of the site to how many queue spaces can be achieved. Now, I've got some photographs of the subject property. This is the front of the center, and you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen is the tenant space where the applicants would like to build the Dunkin' Donuts, and this is the neighboring Burger King to the south. And this is the proposed drive-through is going to be on this side of the building, which would be the south side of the building. And this is the rear of the subject building. The spaces would wrap around that corner of the building. And once again, the rear of the existing building. And here is where you see the parking lot as it intersects with that shared driveway, which serves the Burger King, the bank, the office supply store, that are all a part of that Carpenter Village subdivision. And this is the shared access drive to the rear of the subject property. So as I mentioned, there is the potential that in the event of more than 7 cars queuing, that this shared drive could be affected. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and Mr. Taylor and Mr. Williams are both in attendance today if you have any questions for them.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew at this point? If not, Mr. Taylor or Mr. Williams, anything you'd like to add at this point?
Good afternoon. I'm Roy Williams with D&H Architects. Mr. Blumley explained well, I believe, our discussions and presented it effectively. Be glad to answer any questions you might have regarding the building design aspect of it. Matt obviously knows more about the civil end of it, and Mr. Baumgartner, the franchisee, is also here if you have an operational question or something like that we might be able to help with. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Any questions?
Matthew, or Mr. Taylor, I may have one. I know that Dr. McCabe's site came before the Planning Commission, It looks like dirt's being pushed on it as we speak.
What you're seeing out there is actually the Dollar General, which is over beside of the Boys and Girls. Dr. McCabe's site, Mr. McCabe has not started yet.
Okay. Are you familiar with that site plan at all, though? Talking about Mr. McCabe or Dr.
Yes,
McCabe's?
Sir. Yes,
all right.
Sir.
So, do you know whether or not there is an entrance to this parcel anywhere near where these cars would be queuing up here?
There's going off memory.
Yeah.
The entrances for Dr. McCabe align with the road that comes off of Medical Center Parkway, the one that kind of comes down and does the hard 90 right now.
Right.
After the Dollar General and McCabe's, it will essentially be a four-way stop. Yes, exactly, right there. And then the other one for McCabe, I believe, aligns directly with the access off of Memorial.
Okay.
That one I'm not as sure about, but the other one I'm positive about. So there is still, there's quite some distance, and the pavement right here in this turn is extremely wide because of being these 90s, and I think they were looking at some truck movements because I think the first thing that was developed out here was the office store, and so I think they were looking at some big truck movements coming through there, so they're very large interior radiuses, and then we've got this drive which essentially creates a perfect 90-degree angle on the outside, so a lot of pavement at this location.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, guys. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Is there anyone present who would wish to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion or motion.
No further questions. I'll make a motion to approve the variance.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That application has been approved. Thank you, guys. Our next application is number Z14068 by Mr. Ken Crowder of T-Square Engineering for Mr. Kurt Brevelet of Jonathan's Grill, making the following request for property located in the Commercial Highway and Gateway Design Overlay District zones along the south side of Medical Center Parkway and along the west side of Gresham Park Drive. There are a number of components to this application, 5 total. The first is a 1-foot variance from which requires a minimum of 10 feet between buildings and parking. Another 1-foot variance, which requires a minimum 5 feet wide landscape strip. Number 3, an 8-foot variance of the ordinance requiring a minimum of 15 feet between parking and or access drives. Fourth, a 3-foot variance, which requires minimum 25-foot wide front landscape yard along arterial streets. And third, variance from the ordinance, which requires a minimum 15-foot wide front landscape yard along local streets. Matthew.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. I always got to throw one in there that has a bunch of components to make it hard on y'all. This application comes to us after going to the Planning Commission last month for initial design review. It's for a new Jonathan's Grill restaurant, which I've never been to one, but I understand that there are several located in the Nashville area. It received initial design review approval from the Planning Commission at last month's meeting, and the Planning Commission expressed no objections to the applicant moving forward with these 5 variance requests. And so if these 5 variance requests are approved, he will then move on to the Planning Commission for final design review and site plan approval at next month's Planning Commission day meeting. The site is 1.7 acres in area and is bordered by public streets on 3 sides. Medical Center Parkway to the north, Gresham Park Drive to the east, and Avenue Way to the south. And you have the site plan in front of you. The adjacent property to the west is developed with a multi-tenant retail building with a doctor's office and a Subway restaurant. The proposed restaurant building that the applicant is proposing is just a little under 7,000 square feet and will have 208 seats. It will have driveway access to both Medical Center Parkway and Avenue Way, but not to Gresham Park Drive. Before I go over the variances, I'll go over the reasons why the applicant has expressed he feels that the variances are justified. If you look at the aerial photo that I have up on the screen, you can tell that Medical Center Parkway has some curvature at this location. There is an arc to the property line along both Medical Center Parkway and Avenue Way, and because of that arc, it makes designing certain site elements that are typically in a straight line, such as a row of parking, difficult to design without at least a small portion of that straight row of parking being located within areas that are where it would not typically be allowed to be located. Second, he states that the lot is unusual because it is bounded on 3 sides by public streets, and that presents additional design challenges with regards to setbacks, wider landscape yards, and things of that nature. Finally, he indicates that the lot was existing when his client purchased it and that his client did not create the aforementioned circumstances. All right, so I'll go over the 5 variance requests now. And I would have you reference sheet 1 of 1 on the plans in front of you. It might be easier to follow along on the large-scale sheet than trying to just only look at it on the screen. Variance number 1 and variance number 2 kind of dovetail a little bit because they're in the exact same location. And one thing that I would point out is that Mr. Crowder, the applicant, has on his plans has kind of grayed out the areas that are affected by the variances. So I'll draw your attention to the southeast corner of the building. You'll see a very, very small area of gray, and where it states that it points out that variance number 1 and variance number 2, that's the area of encroachment. Because the lot is greater than 1.5 acres, the building must be separated from the parking lot by a minimum of 10 feet. There is one area at the southeast corner of the building that is 9.54 feet from the parking lot, necessitating a 0.46-foot variance. To allow for additional flexibility, staff has advertised it as a 1-foot variance. It should be noted that with the exception of this corner of the building, the remainder of the building complies with this separation requirement. So that's less than half a foot in one small area of the building. Similarly, variance number 2, in the GDO, there is a 5-foot wide minimum landscape strip along the base of the building. And at the southeast corner of the building, the applicant is providing a 4.54-foot wide base of building landscape strip, necessitating another 0.46-foot variance. And staff has advertised this as a 1-foot variance request. With the exception of this corner, all other areas are compliant with this 5-foot requirement. Variance number 3, I would have you reference the west side of the property. In the GDO, on lots of 1.5 acres or more, there is a minimum required 15-foot separation from the parking lot to the adjacent property lines, and the applicant proposes a 7.5-foot separation adjacent to the western property line and is asking for a 7.5-foot variance in order to allow a row of parking spaces to encroach into this area. And staff has advertised this, has rounded up and advertised it as an 8-foot variance. Variance number 4, front landscape yard along Medical Center Parkway. Because Medical Center Parkway is considered a major arterial street, there is a minimum 25-foot wide front landscape yard adjacent to this street. Due to the curvature of the front property line, a portion of the front row of parking spaces, and you can see where he has kind of grayed in just the very front of those parking spaces where they are encroaching into that 25-foot landscape yard. Due to the curvature of the front property line, a portion of those parking spaces are encroaching. Some of these parking spaces are entirely compliant, but others are encroaching, and at most the encroachment is 2.52 feet. So we've advertised that as a 3-foot variance. Last but not least, and Vice Chairman Young, this is not only a mouthful for you to go over, in your introduction, but it's a mouthful for me as well. Variance number 5, because Avenue Way is a local street, a minimum 15-foot wide front landscape yard is required adjacent to this street. And much in the same way as with the front property line along Medical Center Parkway, there is an encroachment of 2.67 feet into the 15-foot wide front landscape yard along Avenue Way. And so we've advertised that as a 3-foot variance request. And but it should be noted also that some of the spaces in this row of parking are compliant. Each variance request will require a separate motion, and Mr. Crowder is in attendance if you have any questions for him. And I do have some photographs of the subject property. This is looking at the subject property from Medical Center Parkway. This is the existing retail center to the west that I referenced earlier. This is the Chamber of Commerce building across Medical Center Parkway. The Thorntons across Medical Center Parkway. And this is the existing bank to the east across Gresham Park Drive. And this is looking southwest at the new hotels that have been constructed along Conference Center Boulevard in the background, distant from the property. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Matthew? If not, okay, well, Mr. Crowder, anything you'd like to add to this application?
I'm Ken Crowder with T-Square Engineering, and I don't have anything to add to Mr. Blomley's response. Unless you have any questions to ask me, then I can answer those.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Crowder? Don't believe so.
Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
for your time. Appreciate it.
This time we'll conduct a public hearing. Is there anyone present that wishes to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and open the floor for further discussions or a motion. We have general questions, or we want to tackle the first one?
Yeah, I mean, my only comment is, I don't think there's any question based upon your description that this lot merits, and the variances in question, except for on the west side, which is already adjacent to a commercial development, are very minor and are warranted based upon the shape of the lot. So I'll make a motion that we approve the 1-foot variance with respects to the 10 feet between buildings and parking or access drives on lots of 1.5 acres or more.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that component is passed. Next is the 1-foot variance for the landscape strip in that southeast corner.
I'll make a motion to approve the 1-foot variance from the 5-foot wide landscape strip.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That component's been approved. Next, we'll tackle the 8-foot variance.
I will make a motion that we approve the 8-foot variance with respects to the minimum 15 feet between parking or access drives.
And I'll second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That piece has been approved. Next, the 3-foot variance for the front landscape yard.
I'll make a motion to approve the 3-foot variance for the minimum 25-foot wide front landscape.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No, that piece is approved. And the last 3-foot variance for the landscape along the local street.
Again, I'll make a motion to approve that 3-foot variance.
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, that gets the last piece, and that application has been approved in its entirety. Appreciate you guys coming in. All right, next we'll move to application Z14069 by Mr. Clyde Roundtree of Huddleston Steel Engineering for Mr. Eric Bloom, making the following request for property located in a residential multifamily RM16 zone at 611 Fairview Avenue. This application has three components. The first is a 14-foot variance from the minimum required 20-foot side building setback for two-story multiple family dwellings. The second is a 3-foot variance from the zoning ordinance which requires a minimum 5-foot wide side planting yard where the site is 1 acre or less. And the last is a 3-foot variance from the zoning ordinance which requires a minimum 3-foot wide landscape strip along the sides of the base of the building. Matthew?
Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. Subject property is located along the west side of Fairview Avenue. There's an existing single-family residence there. 611 Fairview Avenue is the address. It is zoned RM16 multifamily residential with a maximum density of 16 dwelling units per acre. According to the developer, the existing house is occupied by 3 tenants. It was constructed in 1922 according to the Rutherford County Property Assessor's website. And he proposes to construct a new 4-unit multifamily building at the rear of the lot, and this would bring the total number of units on the subject property to 5, and he has indicated that these will be for-rent units, and he has requested 3 variances in order to move forward with the proposed development. And in front of you on the screen is an aerial photo of the subject property for your reference. This block of Fairview is the block just to the north of Ewing Boulevard, a few blocks west of the MTSU campus. The site is 0.47 acres in area. It is surrounded on all 4 sides by RM16 zoning, and adjacent land uses include a single-family home to the north, quadruplex to the south, and multifamily uses to the west and southwest. As I mentioned, the total number of units proposed would be 5, 1 existing and 4 proposed. Based on the lot size, the RM16 zone would allow a maximum of 7 dwelling units on the subject property. So with the total number of 5 proposed, he would be 2 under what the maximum number of units would be permitted on the subject property based on the size of the area of the lot. There's an existing gravel drive into the site along the south side of the existing house, and the applicant proposes to construct a hard surface driveway in its place, and I'll pull up the site plan. And so you can see the existing house here, the proposed driveway coming in to the south of the existing house into an area of 14 parking spaces, and then the 4 townhouse-style multifamily units at the rear of the lot. The number of parking spaces that are proposed are 2 over what the minimum requirements of the zoning ordinance are. The use is permitted by right. So this, just to reiterate, this is not a special use permit request. The use is permitted by right. However, he is requesting variances in order to move forward with his proposed development. The proposed units will look similar to an existing development that the applicant constructed a year or 2 ago called the Cottages at Crestland, which are a block to the east on Crestland Avenue. And I've got some photographs that I'll show you of those in a moment to give you an idea of what he is proposing. The subject lot was recorded as a part of the Harrison and Black subdivision in 1924. At that time, it was 100 feet wide by 240 feet deep. Based on staff's research, however, the property was reduced to its current 85-foot width sometime between 1924 and 1963. The applicant indicates that the primary reason for these variances is the narrowness of the lot. As stated earlier, the lot size is large enough for the RM16 zoning to permit 7 units. However, he is proposing 5 total, as he has indicated that this is the minimum number of units that he needs on site for the project to be economically viable. And now I'll go over the requested variances. Variance number 1 pertains to the side setback of the 4-unit proposed structure. Because this brings the total number of units to 5, the multifamily setbacks that we would apply to any multifamily development from 5 units up would apply to this particular lot. So these would be the same setbacks that would be applied if this was a 400-unit apartment complex on 20 acres versus 5 units on 0.47 acres, which is the current proposal. If the development were only to contain 4 units instead of 5, the minimum side setback would only be 5 feet, with the sum of the 2 side setbacks equaling no less than 15. The applicant proposes for the new 4-unit building to be located 6 feet off of both the north and south side lot lines, and thus he has requested a 14-foot side setback variance pertaining to both property lines. Because the subject property is only 85 feet wide, and with the side setbacks being 20 feet apiece, the building envelope is roughly only 45 feet wide for multifamily residential uses. The second variance pertains to the side planting yard. Our Section 27 of the zoning ordinance, which is the landscape ordinance, requires a 5-foot wide perimeter planting yard along the entire development. There is ample room to meet this requirement along both the front and rear property lines. However, because of the narrowness of the lot, the applicant has requested a variance to this requirement along the side property lines. And at its narrowest point, you'll see up at the north side of the lot where the bump out of the parking spaces is located so that people can back up. It narrows down to a minimum of 2 feet along that northern property line, and it's 3 feet along that southern property line, with the exception of adjacent to the building, or just south of the building, where it is also 2 feet off the property line. The encroachment of the parking lot into the side planting yards will help to maximize the number of parking spaces provided on site, and I believe that's why the applicant is likely requesting this, is to achieve as many parking spaces as possible in the parking lot. Despite the narrow width of the side planting yards, the applicant is showing landscape plantings in these areas on the conceptual landscape plan. Of course, the landscape plan that's been submitted is just conceptual in nature. It is not a final draft of the landscape plan. Finally, the third variance has to do with the base of building landscaping. Our zoning ordinance requires for multifamily uses for there to be landscaping, a 3-foot wide landscape strip along the front and sides of the building. And the applicant is providing a 5-foot landscape strip along the front of the proposed building. But as mentioned previously, the new building is proposed to only be 6 feet from the north and south side property lines. In addition, there is a sidewalk proposed along the south side of the building for access purposes, and so that tenants will be able to wheel their garbage cans out to the front of the site on trash day. Because of the lack of distance of the proposed building to the side property lines, as well as the need to maintain proper access around the building for a variety of reasons, including property maintenance, it does not appear practical to include plantings adjacent to the sides of the building if the board decides to approve the side building setback variances. Each variance will require a separate motion, and Mr. Roundtree is in the audience today, as is Mr. Bloom, the developer, and I have some photographs to show you of the property. This is the front of the existing house at 611 Fairview. This is the adjacent property to the north, the adjacent property to the south, and that tree line appears to be on the property line. And this is looking across Fairview from the subject property. And this is the existing driveway, the existing backyard where the proposed apartments will be located. And this is a view of the existing backyard looking back towards the existing house. This is looking north from the subject property and looking south from the subject property and looking west at the rear of the lot. And as I mentioned, the style of building, according to the applicant, will be very similar to his development, the cottages at Crestland, which was a approved and developed a year or two ago. This is the front of the building in the cottages at Crestland that faces Crestland Avenue. And this is the rear of those units, same units, and the parking lot behind it. Oh, could we pull up the computer screen, please? Okay. Those are, I apologize for that. Those are the front of those units on Crestland Avenue. The rear of those units and the parking lot that exists in between the front building and the back building. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew at this point? Do you happen to look at the couple of pictures, one of the property to the north and then to the south? I guess this is obviously set up as rental property, or is the one to the south appears to be a rental property, and maybe that's a single family to the north? Is that?
I believe just based on what based on what I've observed on our GIS system, there was only one address associated with the property to the north, so I believe it's a single family home. And the property to the south, I believe, is a quadruplex, because there were 4 addresses associated with that property on our GIS system.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Mr. Roundtree, anything you'd like to add to the application? All right. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Is there anyone present that wishes to speak for or against the application? Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion or motion.
I only have one question, Mr. Blumley. Did you say, I know you said that you weren't, or the city wasn't looking to require the landscaping all the way around the building due to the fact that the building in between the sidewalk and the property line, there wasn't enough room, I guess is the best way to say it. But did you say that they were proposing it as part of their landscape, or did I misunderstand that?
No, yeah, they are not proposing landscaping directly adjacent to the building on its 2 sides.
Right.
I believe that they are going to try to, where possible, along the sides of the building, provide landscaping, maybe separated from the building by a couple of feet. But if the board approves the building setback variance, it just does not seem practical for that requirement. We certainly want to make sure that there's proper access for emergency personnel and just for general maintenance purposes to the back of the building.
Okay.
All right. The first component of this was the 14-foot variance for the required 20-foot side setback.
I'll make a motion to approve the 14-foot variance.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Or not? So that part has been approved. Next is the 3-foot variance for the 5-foot wide side planting yard.
I'll make a motion that we approve that 3-foot variance.
And I'll second.
A motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That component has been approved. And the third portion, a 3-foot variance for the landscape strip along the sides of the base of the building.
I'll make a motion to approve the 3-foot variance for the 3-foot wide landscape strip.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. That application has been approved in its 3 parts. Thank you. All right. Next, we'll move on to application Z14070 by Mr. Clyde Roundtree of Huddleston Steel Engineering for New Vision Baptist Church. This is the property located in a RS-15 zone at 1750 North Thompson Lane. This application has 3 components as well. The first, special use permit in order to expand an existing institutional group assembly use. Second, an 8-foot variance from the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which requires a minimum 10-foot wide side planting yard where the site is 5 acres or more. And third, a variance from the zoning ordinance which states that parking spaces for institutional group assembly uses shall not be permitted in the required front yard. Matthew, if you'll tackle that one for us.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. Our final public hearing today is a special use permit and some associated variances for New Vision Baptist Church, located at 1750 North Thompson Lane. Subject property is zoned RS15, despite the fact that it is in a predominantly commercial and industrial area. I guess more commercial now than commercial and office now with the development of the gateway, even though it does have industrial zoning in the immediate vicinity. As you know, or as you recall, the church has been before us on several occasions with expansion plans, and they're coming to us today with their plans for parking lot improvements and building improvements, which will essentially max out the current property. The most pressing need that they have today is for additional parking space. According to the church, they have indicated to staff that they are actually running a shuttle during service times from the Murfreesboro Medical Clinic parking lot to the subject property because they just don't have enough parking on the subject property. And I think also they have an agreement with the Primary Care and Hope Clinic to allow the use of their parking spaces as well. So they have a pretty immediate need to add some additional parking, and there are also some future building improvements that will be not immediate, but will be in the future. And they have a pretty good idea of what they want to do for those building improvements. So they have gone ahead and included that in the request so that they don't have to come back to the Board of Zoning Appeals when they get ready to build the building. However, as you know, if those plans change and they do something substantially different, then that will require reapplication to the board. With that being said, as I mentioned, the property is zoned RS15. It was annexed into the property annexed into the city in 1994, and it was originally approved in the county prior to its annexation. In 2011, the church was approved by the BZA for a special use permit for a building and parking lot expansion. The church now proposes, as I mentioned, two different components with its special use permit. The first is a total of 444 new parking spaces, and these parking spaces will be located in the northern portion of the site adjacent to West College Street predominantly, and there will be several new rows of parking spaces closer to North Thompson Lane as well. The construction of the parking lot will actually involve the removal of several of the recreational amenities that the church has on its property, including the existing ball field, the basketball court, and the pavilion. And the church believes that the need for the parking outweighs the need for those recreational facilities on the property. It should be noted with the parking lot expansion that the city's traffic engineer does have some concerns internal to the site about the internal traffic design, and so that's just purely being pointed out for informational purposes. Before this comes back to the Planning Commission, the applicant will need to reach out to the city's traffic engineer to discuss the internal design of the parking lot and to remedy any problem areas that are in that parking lot. In addition to the larger area of parking, and I will call your attention to the what's entitled the Variance Exhibit. You'll notice here are the bulk of the new parking spaces. And then, as I mentioned, there are 2 rows of parking spaces along Thompson Lane. And there's also a sheet that I've laid out in front of you on the very top, and that is the 2011 plan that was approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals. So, if you were to compare that to the plan today, you'll notice that there is substantially more parking that is proposed in this current plan than in what was approved in 2011. Thus, if nothing else was being requested, if it was only the parking, they would still have to come to the Board of Zoning Appeals today because of the substantially greater amount of parking. This is a zoom in of the parking area that is proposed along West College Street. And in addition to the parking spaces, there will be a new access drive onto West College Street as well. You'll notice that there is a variance referenced on this sheet, which is sheet 2 of 4. It's a perimeter planting yard variance. There are a lot of sheets involved in this application. But there is a 10-foot perimeter planting yard required along the entirety of the site. And back in 2011, the board approved a 4-foot variance along the property line that the church shares with the Primary Care and Hope Clinic for a 6-foot landscape yard instead of a 10-foot landscape yard. With the current plans, the church would like to add a sidewalk to help facilitate safe pedestrian movements from the parking lot to the church during service times, to take those pedestrians out of any potential conflict with vehicles. And so that proposed sidewalk is going to cut into that property line, or cut into that landscape yard even further. So they are requesting an 8-foot variance because at its narrowest point, that landscape yard will only be 2 feet wide, adjacent to the Primary Care and Hope Clinic. Now, there are, as I mentioned, 2 areas of parking that they're proposing to build along North Thompson Lane. The zoning ordinance requires that parking for churches in residential zoning districts must be located outside of the required front setback. There was an area that was approved back in 2011, and that approval still stands. But there is an additional area where they are proposing 46 spaces along North Thompson Lane that will be as close as 23 feet to the front property line, which would encroach 17 feet into that 40-foot required front setback. The church does have some pretty substantial landscaping in the front, in that front planting yard along North Thompson Lane, and they have indicated that they do intend to either relocate or replant additional landscaping in front of the new parking spaces to keep that nice visual appearance from North Thompson Lane as you're driving along the church's frontage. And the applicant indicates that the primary reason for this variance is just because they're trying to maximize the amount of parking on site, and they feel that this is one of the best locations to provide that parking. With regards to the building expansion that is a component of the special use permit, there is what they're calling a building exhibit, which is a little bit further into the set of plans, and I've got that called up on the screen. The building expansion in total will include approximately 35,650 square feet to include a new gym / multi-purpose room, an expansion of the existing lobby, an addition to the children's education wing, and a new cornerstone room. And after construction, the total building area on site will be approximately 140,000 square feet. The building addition will primarily be located interior to the site, filling in a gap in between the sanctuary and the education wing. A total of 34 parking spaces will be displaced by the building addition when it's constructed. And according to the project architect, the proposed building height will be 35 feet, which is the maximum building height for the RS-15 zone. And the building additions will match the architecture of the existing building, and the exterior materials will primarily consist of brick and ephes. And I'll show you an architectural rendering by the architect, Mr. Kit Osborne. You'll see the area that is darkened is the existing sanctuary building with a brick and ephes materials, and they're looking to replicate that same design on the proposed building that you see on the left-hand side of that page. One thing that I did want to point out that this will need to be clarified prior to the Planning Commission's site plan review, if the board approves the application, is confirmation that the foot candle levels of the photometric lighting plan do not exceed half a foot candle beyond the property line. We do have a photometric lighting plan, and there is a little bit of confusion as to where the lighting levels reach half a foot candle, which is the maximum lighting level at the property line. So that photometric lighting plan will need to be, that information will need to be confirmed prior to Planning Commission's review of this request. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Each request will require a separate motion, and I do have some photographs to show to you as well. This is the existing church building as viewed from North Thompson Lane. And the proposed building addition would be constructed in this kind of alcove area, kind of a gap in between the existing buildings. And this is looking west across North Thompson Lane at the Battlefield property. Proposed parking addition would encroach in this required front yard. You can see that they have substantial shrubbery and trees planted along this existing parking lot, and they will be replanting or replacing those shrubs and trees. And the proposed parking lot addition along West College Street would be constructed in this field where their existing recreational amenities are located. The landscape variance would be proposed along this property line, which is adjacent to the Primary Care and Hope Clinic. And there's the Primary Care and Hope Clinic. And this is looking looking across West College Street from the subject property. Mr. Roundtree is present, as is Mr. Kit Osborne, the project architect as well.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew? Just out of curiosity, is the church required to, I know they provide police direct traffic in and out during their services with the amount of cars. Is that something they're providing, or is that something that's the city looks to help them with?
I do believe, and I think most churches that have a substantial amount of traffic do look on their own to provide some type of traffic control measures. And I do believe that they do have a off-duty sheriff's deputy directing traffic during service times. Is that correct? And a representative from New Vision, I believe, is going to come up and address that question.
That's fine. Just curiosity of mine. Anything else you'd like to add to the application, feel free to.
Thank you guys for hearing us today.
Sure.
We do have, during service times, we run 3 deputy sheriffs that direct traffic in and out of the facility. We have a great relationship with the sheriff's department. Love serving this community in the prison ministry, Pastor John Spurgeon. We also have Murfreesboro City inside the building at all times during service hours. We run 2 to 3 officers inside the premises. So Murfreesboro Police Department's inside. Rutherford County Sheriff's Department is directing traffic.
Could you give us your name, please?
Sure. Yes, sir. I'm Lynn Hubbard. I'm the business administrator at New Vision.
Thank you.
Anything else you'd like to add to the application? All right, at this time we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you'd come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussion or tackle the 3 components.
If there's no discussion, I'll make a motion that we approve the special use permit.
A second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that part is passed. Next is the 8-foot variance for the 10-foot wide planting yard.
I have one question before we vote on this piece. You mentioned that there was going to be a sidewalk between Primary Hope Clinic and the new parking area. Is there already, and I couldn't see or I couldn't tell by the pictures that we had, is there already landscaping between there, and will that landscaping be affected or not?
I believe the landscaping along this property line is on the primary care and Hope Clinic's side of the property line. Mr. Roundtree is showing some landscaping in this 2-foot area, and it's 2 feet at its narrowest point,
right?
2 or 3 feet. It will be wider than that at some point. So I do believe that Mr. Roundtree would be looking to include additional landscaping along that property line where feasible. Is that correct, Mr. Roundtree? Mr. Roundtree, in addition to being the applicant, is the landscape architect on the project.
Mr. Roundtree's pretty handy.
And he was nodding affirmatively.
Yes.
Affirmatively to the last comment.
Yeah. With that, I'll make a motion that we approve the 8-foot variance in reference to the minimum 10-foot wide planting yard.
And I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that component is passed. And last is the variance for the parking spaces in the front yard.
And I'll make a motion to approve the parking spaces.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none, and that application has been approved. Thank you, guys. Next, we'll move to staff reports and other business.
Vice Chairman Young, I have none other than to wish the board members and the community a happy holiday season, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Thank you. You as well.
You.
And same here.
You as well. Thank you. All right, and with that, we'll be adjourned.
Jingle, 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 jingle.